6 months ago, I set out to find my in-game monitor, and $1,300 later, I ended up with this, the LG 32GS95UE. Catchy, I know. However, this monitor has all the mainline features you could ask for. It's 32 inches, 4K, 240Hz, and it's OLED. And while it does have some features specific to it, this is a review of this class of monitors, not this display, so let's get right into the video. So first I want to take a look at all the positives of this monitor and what makes it so great. And this of course brings us to our first category that I feel it's obligatory we talk about. Burn-in. After using this monitor for something like 8 months now, I have experienced no signs of burn-in. While I do take necessary precautions such as a screensaver that activates after 5 minutes of inactivity, any application that I'm using, the taskbar is going to be completely static, so is any UI elements like the border around a browser or a productivity app that I'm using. This display specifically has a very regular image cleaning cycle that activates after you turn the PC off pretty much every day. While I obviously can't say burn-in has been solved or anything like that, I can confidently say that the deterrents have gotten pretty good, so it's something that you shouldn't completely obsess over. Other than, of course, taking the necessary precautions to make sure it doesn't happen super fast. Speaking of productivity, this monitor, like most 4K monitors, is 32 inches. And while that might not sound like a lot, coming from a standard 25-inch monitor, that's a 70% increase in display area. Seriously, it's really hard to show you over a camera. However, in person, the display size difference is absolutely massive, and it almost feels like a small TV. So for doing any kind of work on this computer that requires multiple things on the screen, there is plenty of display area to split screen things and have your content side by side. In fact, I went from 3 25-inch 1080p monitors that now reside on my sim rig to this one 32-inch monitor, which, for the record, if you want a video about how to build your own sim racing rig, let me know in a comment down below, because I would really like to make that video. However, so far I haven't had any constraints in terms of screen size. In fact, if anything, I would say my productivity has increased. Whether or not we'd like to admit it, our second monitor is often used for YouTube, while our work that needs to be done sits on our main monitor. For me, a single 32-inch display has proven more than enough for productivity work. Needless to say, gaming on a 4K OLED panel is an amazing experience, and when you factor in the 240Hz refresh rate, I would say it's life-changing. Now, of course, for the price, you would hope it's uncompromising, which I would venture to say that it is. However, expect your standards to be set way higher than you ever thought possible for every display you come across afterwards. Games look sharp and crisp on a 4K display, most of which not even needing anti-aliasing because most of the jagged edges are taken care of by the super high resolution in and of itself. When playing games in 4K, you notice details that you would never be able to spot in lower resolutions. Even older games rendered and displayed at 4K look absolutely amazing. In terms of the numbers, a 4K 32-inch display has 50% more pixels per inch than a 1080p 25-inch panel, which of course is going to be a massive difference in terms of clarity and sharpness. And of course that section completely disregarded the other two great things about this display, the ultra high refresh rate and the OLED panel. Obviously with an OLED, colors are going to pop in a way that they just don't on any other kind of display technology. And there are dark inky blacks that make shadows in games look all the more better. And while it isn't the most important for single player gaming, OLED panels have very, very good motion clarity combined with the extra smoothness you get from the really high refresh rate. Single player games come to life on this monitor in a way I never thought possible, with recent releases like Atomfall being genuinely breathtaking in some instances. Now this is where things start to go downhill. Coming from 1080p, 4K is a huge tax on my system. After all, my poor aging RTX 3080 12GB is screaming for mercy in some games when it's having to render 4 times the amount of pixels as before. And of course, if you have a really high-end PC, this might not be such an issue for you, but just let it be known, if you're coming from a lower resolution, even 1440p, you're really going to have to turn down those settings to hit the same FPS target. And that sort of brings me into the fact that being a 4K 240Hz panel, for most people, you really have to choose one or the other. Like if I'm playing a single player game and I crank the settings up, I expect it to look beautiful, however, it's only going to run 100 to 120 FPS maximum, with some bigger games dipping into the double digits, which in my opinion kind of feels like a waste on this display. And of course, if you care about hitting FPS targets, you're going to be pulling out all the stops and turning the settings as low as they'll go to try to hit 240 Hz. But at 4K, that's almost impossible. The only way to get high refresh rates with semi-good visual quality is using upscaling tech. But again, that seems kind of redundant to me, as you paid for a really nice display and now you're going to use upscaling tech to make it look a lot worse. I guess you can at least think of it as future-proofing in a way, however, it's still not optimal. Now, of course, in terms of competitive gaming, this display isn't bad by any means. Don't get me wrong. But if you're somebody who primarily plays competitive games, or you're buying this monitor for competitive gaming, it makes absolutely no sense. Now, I know we just covered the performance aspects of owning a display like this, but in competitive gaming where refresh rate is really the main thing that matters, you're going to have to turn your settings all the way down to eke out maybe 240 Hz if you're lucky with upscaling tech. Especially in a game like my competitive game of choice, Call of Duty or Warzone, those games really are not easy to run anymore. At DLSS performance, I'm cracking like maybe 160, but more like 120 FPS in some areas in Black Ops 6. And so that begs the question, what is the point of a 4K display if you're really going to run DLSS and render it in 1080p anyways? And to its credit, DLSS does a pretty good job sometimes, but it really can be a disadvantage in some examples where it generates things that shouldn't be there or creates weird texture glitches that give you a competitive disadvantage. Of course, a lot of other competitive games are relatively light, allowing you to run a high refresh rate at okay settings. However, again, you would probably be better served with an even higher refresh rate, 1440p or even 1080p panel depending on the game. Again, of course, I have to mention 4K 240Hz gaming really is not that bad. Like, I'm really kind of underselling it here. However, for a competitive gamer, just by the nature of its specs, it's just not meant to be. Of course, OLED gives you a really good advantage in terms of response times and motion clarity, as we were just talking about. However, that's really the only specifically good thing you can say about this display. A couple months ago, when pretty much all I did on this computer was play Warzone, if you would have asked me my opinion of this monitor, I would have told you it was a waste of money. Because low settings, DLSS just looks awful on this monitor, and I was getting like half the FPS. Now we get into the very unsavory aspects of this display. As I mentioned earlier, I spent about $1,300 on this, which is not cheap. And of course, since you've heard me harping on the performance aspects of this display, you're going to need a monster of a computer to run it properly. I would say the 3080 12GB that I have is the absolute bare minimum for a display like this. And really at 4K at this FPS, 16GB is the bare minimum. And the cheapest card by Nvidia on the market right now that's 16GB is $1,000 MSRP. When I tried to buy one at Best Buy the other day, $1,400. So if you want to buy this display, you're going to be dumping serious cash, not only on the monitor, but also on the thing that you use to run it. For a setup like this, you're going to be seeing like $3,000, $4,000, even $5,000 to even get something that's worthwhile. And that's a hard sell for even somebody with a lot of disposable income. And considering that price, you think that this experience would be flawless, but you would be wrong because it's definitely not. While this isn't a bug, rather a feature in a way, something that often isn't mentioned in these reviews is the use of display stream compression. Display stream compression compresses the bandwidth of this monitor to allow it to be run on older HDMI and DisplayPort standards. This turns one of your GPU display outputs into a fun place to store half of an HDMI cable. In other words, it sacrifices the bandwidth of two different ports to the 4K 240Hz gods, which maybe if you're like me doesn't matter for you, but if you're dead set on using multiple monitors or you have some kind of broken display output already, you might be SOL. Of course, as for bugs and glitches, this is pretty much bleeding edge tech, and everything about this is going to be temperamental, so each display is going to have its own set of problems. And while this technically won't apply to everyone, pretty much any monitor in this class is going to have HDR, and Windows HDR, Auto HDR is really terrible. Sometimes Auto HDR makes games look better, and sometimes it makes YouTube videos look unwatchable. For whatever reason, Google Chrome had a problem with playing videos that didn't look completely oversaturated and underexposed, and for whatever reason, in some games, Auto HDR made it impossible to record them because it just completely oversaturated the image. I have no idea why. Of course, when working properly, HDR is awesome, it's just that Windows implementation of it really sucks for whatever reason. Some other weird issues stem from OLED technology itself. For example, there are some weird banding in certain shades of gray that are definitely noticeable and don't look very good. Something else that really irritates me for whatever reason is there's this weird aura around YouTube videos where the colors of the video kind of spill out into the browser, and I'm not sure what to blame that on, but it's absolutely awful and it never happened before, and I'm pretty sure it's an OLED problem. And of course, we have to mention burn-in again, because while I said it wasn't a problem for me over the past 8 months, it's going to be a problem eventually. And after owning this monitor for a couple of years, I'm sure I'm probably going to have some burn-in. So you have to make sure you're very proactive in preventing it. So after all that, do I recommend this monitor? Well, you're going to hate me for this because it depends. I think this monitor is perfect for some people. I myself do not regret this purchase at all, and I honestly think it is life-changing. You need some prerequisites like a good amount of disposable income, patience, the knowledge of how to fix things, and a really good PC. If that person I just listed off was you, which it might be because that's my target audience, then this display is definitely for you. But if you're an average PC gamer or an above average PC gamer that just doesn't want to deal with spending that amount of money or dealing with any of the bugs that come along with cutting edge technology, I just can't say this monitor is for you. And until these displays become cheaper, more common, and have less issues, I don't know if it ever will be. However, I think that's going to be it for today. If I gave you any value, maybe some tips on what you should do about your next monitor upgrade, please remember to leave a like and subscribe down below for future content. Thank you for watching.